Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Patrice Petro, and I'm the director of the Carsey-Wolf Center, UCSB Center for Media Studies. Today, we're thrilled to have Scott Frank with us to discuss Babylon Berlin as part of our fall series on Global TV. Today, Scott has generously agreed to talk with me about Babylon Berlin, a German television series that we both admire. It's now my pleasure to invite Scott Frank to the screen. Hi, Scott.
Hello.
So thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me about this series that we both admire. I'd like to begin with a quote from one of the show's co-creator, Tom Tykwer, who gave an interview in the Wall Street Journal. He said this about the Weimar era and the pivotal year 1929, which is the historical anchor for the series' first 3 seasons. He explained, and I quote, "At the time, people did not realize how absolutely unstable this new construction of society which the Weimar Republic represented was. It interested us because of the fragility of democracy had been put to the test quite profoundly in recent years. By 1929, new opportunities were arising. Women had more possibilities to take part in society, especially in the labor market, as Berlin became crowded with new thinking, new art, theater, music, journalism, so on. People tend to forget that was also a very rough era in German history. There was a lot of poverty, and people who survived the war were suffering from a great deal of trauma." So my first question, let me begin with 157 characters, Babylon Berlin follows a young detective from Cologne who finds himself immersed in the nightlife and political turmoil of Berlin, in 1929, which is interesting in itself, while working with an aspiring female police detective who moonlights as a prostitute to make ends meet. The series draws on historical figures and events, but it is not bound by them or to the novels on which it's based. As a scholar of the period, what hooked me on the series was not just the evocation of Weimar history, but also the history of its intellectual formations, including its cinema. References to Walter Benjamin and Bertolt Brecht, Metropolis, Caligari, the films of Murnau and Fritz Lang, not to mention the historical footage of Marlene Dietrich's screen test for The Blue Angel at one point, which was in fact the first German sound film. This series, like the era on which it's based, explores darker themes than typically found in Hollywood: crime, immorality, social decay, and so on, the destructive powers of money and technology. I'm happy to say more, but I wanted to ask you up front, what drew you to Babylon Berlin? I read somewhere that you were totally enamored by the production design and the designers themselves. So please tell us more, what drew you to Babylon Berlin?
Everything you just said. I mean, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And I had read the Berlin Noir series by Philip Kerr, which I was quite a fan of, which featured a private detective in Nazi Germany, and always loved it. It just, the noir seemed ripe for that place. And I thought, when I watched the first episode, I was really intrigued, and it hit me within the first few minutes. I really wanted to be a part of it. And by the way, she wasn't a detective at first, his partner. She was she was doing all sorts of odd jobs for the police department. She wanted to be a detective and was working as a prostitute. And I thought that she was really interesting. She's actually maybe the most interesting character, and the character who goes through the most growth in the show. It's just fascinating. But all of those elements, that it was a world I really didn't know that well, and it was so visual. I just things I'd never seen before, which we'll get to, but it was really tremendous. And I was not only enamored with all those artists, I hired them all for the Queen's Gambit. So I'm sure we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, great. Well, as you noted, I mean, the show devotes uncommon attention and expense to its period details: costumes, decor, automobiles, even large sets and sound stages. Which of these impressed you most? Which still stay with you? The Mocha FD Club, where Weimar decadence is on display amid these Moorish arches and Orient Express decor. Something else, somewhere else?
I think the performances and the production design were top notch. I mean, obviously, Tom Tykwer is an amazing director, and he directed with, I think, 1 or 2 other directors, but Tom is somebody I've always really admired. And but the production design was very specific, and I didn't know, it didn't feel kitschy. It felt real to me. It felt like I was there. And later when I was in Berlin and I saw the set they used for the street, it's very small, you know, they kind of around the club. I love the design for the club. I love everything that happens in the club. I could see an entire series just based on that club.
Right, right. I love the Armenians' private suite with the Golden Globes suspended on pendulums with the secret key, and just the drapes and the carpets. I mean, it's this fantastic space, and that's not the only one. And of course, obviously, the filmmakers were, they're quoting from a lot of Weimar art culture and print culture and movie culture. You know, the number of scenes struck me, like one where Helga goes to, she's pregnant, and one character and she sees a poster on a playbill, bill on the street, and it's Katie Kollwitz's, the starving working class mother, and all these, fights for abortion rights. And, so there's other ways too. I mean, some critics have said that even the beginning, the way episode 1 opens is like reminiscent of Caligari, but we could talk more of that with the, hypnosis.
Well, I think it's even, I think people are even being too smart, because it's also just, forget the posters and the references and everything else. It just feels exotic. It just feels very strange, yet it feels like something bad is going to happen at any moment. People are having too good a time. And also not just the fancier sets, the slums, right, the apartments, they were also really well done. And the exterior of these places, and the train yard out in the countryside, you look at every single set. Even the train itself was really interesting. The train that features so prominently in the first season, at least, really, really fascinating, beautiful, and specific. And for me, it's less the sort of in-jokes, the kind of politicals. It's more the storytelling and the specificity of production design that always gets me. When you see it all works together, but it's not, you're noticing it, but it's not taking over.
Right. Well, as we discussed before with respect to the Queen's Gambit, Berlin may not seem to some people as an obvious choice to tell the story of a Kentucky chess prodigy. But Berlin architecture, both East and West, offered, as you discussed the last time we talked, it offered a lot of possibilities for recreating the world of America in the 1960s, as well as sites for international chess tournaments. Can you tell me more about what you learned about contemporary Berlin as a site for location shooting?
Well, I have to go back to when I first brought Uli Hanusch on to the show. I mean, the only way to answer that is to answer this. Uli was the production designer on Babylon Berlin, and I went after him. And my assumption had always been that the show would be based in New York. Because the show takes place in New York, Kentucky, Paris, Moscow, Mexico City, Las Vegas, and I'm probably leaving something out, Ohio, all these different places where she travels and where the story happens. So I thought we'd be based somewhere and maybe send some units out for some footage here or there, but do it that way. Uli was the one who said, do it all in Berlin. Said, come to Berlin. I will show you an example of every bit of architecture that will work for what you want to do. And so we all trekked to Berlin, and I soon learned that Uli has a way of making it the world revolve around him. We're all just extras in his movie of life. I say that in a very loving way because I so adore him. But we started later so that we could wait for him to have a vacation. We did everything for Uli because he's amazing. But he said, come to Germany, and he showed us a building that could be Las Vegas on the interior, and we shot there. He showed us something that could be Russia. He showed us something that could be Mexico City. We went and drove into the countryside and saw someplace where we could be part of Kentucky. So we ended up doing 90% there because we saw it there. I don't know that it was so much about their architecture beyond the fact that it is post-war. because the city was pretty much leveled during the war. It has a variety of things. They rebuilt a lot of structures to look like they did originally, but they've also built other strange buildings in bizarre, different kinds of architecture as a result, because Berlin is truly this place where anybody creative in that part of the world, especially from Germany, because if you didn't want to be in the draft, you went to Berlin. That was the one city where you're allowed to go. So that was all artists. So all of that factors into it. And by the time we spent a week with Uli, we had seen I was really convinced we could do it all there if we were very careful about how we used digital effects.
In our discussion, I just want to kind of circle back to something you mentioned, but when we talked about the Queen's Gambit, I vividly recall you telling me about the central importance of casting, especially with the actors who carry the majority of the scenes. As I said here, we have 157 characters in this drama. What performances in Babylon Berlin did you find most compelling, and why? I mean, you mentioned, the actress who plays Lottie, and I remember you talking about the importance of Beth Harmon's red hair that sets her apart, especially in these more very gray, dreary landscapes, and so she pops both as a site of attention, but also as being different than others around her. And I couldn't help me think of Lottie's, green cloche hat, which separates her from others on the streets, or she puts that on, and all of a sudden, in this drab world, there's this like pop of color. But anyways, I wanted to go back to characters and casting and what you thought there with Babylon.
I loved her. I thought Lisa, her last name I can't remember. I thought, the bad guy, the big guy. Again, Bruno, I'm not going to remember their names, so I'll just tell you the characters, the actors, but he was tremendous. I thought the kid with the deaf parents was tremendous. I mean, I don't know if I could pick anybody. I thought the casting, pretty much soup to nuts, was pretty good. Nobody bad. The woman, the Russian woman who performs in the club, the singer, she's amazing. I mean, all the way through it. The Armenian gangster who owns the club is tremendous. And I almost cast him as Vasily Borgov in the show.
I could see that.
But he was tremendous. They were all great. I thought, I don't know that I can pick one. I think the character of Lottie was my favorite character, but I think the performances were across the board really terrific. My God, what's his name? The captain, the police detective, his wife was amazing. And the landlady, oh my God, where he's staying in that boarding house, who's in love with him. I mean, we could go on forever. And if you haven't seen the show, this is going to get boring, so I'll stop.
Well, it's also interesting that mostly all the characters are pretty complex. So someone like Bruno, this massive wall of a man, and he's he's lethal, he's brutal, he's a killer, he's a liar, he's a manipulator, but he's warm, he loves his wife, he helps Lottie when she doesn't have the money to bury her mother. So he's, so that you can't, the characters, it's not like the one bad guy. I mean, you get, even with when in the club where all these worlds collide of, conservative nationalists and gangsters and people off the street, but they're very complicated stories. Even Stefan, the deaf assistant, who is really kind of an informant for the counselor Benda, but of course it works narratively because his parents are deaf, so he can read lips. But as an undercover assistant to the cop, he can read the people's lips and see them through his binoculars as they're plotting, these nefarious activities. Anyways, they're really complex characters as well. It was interesting to me that the series only, and I'd love to hear you talk about this too. I don't remember this at all in Queen's Gambit, but here the series offers a recap beginning only with episode 7 in season 1. Or the first season, with so many characters and so many complications, so much history and unfinished plot lines. I mean, that's the other thing. We don't, not at all, every plot line is resolved. It doesn't work like that. Is this a series designed to be binge watched? And what is lost and what's gained in that mode of viewing, do you think?
I don't know if it was, I don't know how it was released initially in Germany. And Netflix, with their own productions, doesn't do recaps. They don't do recaps. So if there's a recap on their show, it's usually because the show was made somewhere else. And so they've acquired the show. So Babylon Berlin was a show they acquired. And then later, I think for the third season and fourth season, helped finance it.
Why don't they do recaps?
It's just, they just have certain rules. They just don't, they don't do it. And they feel like it smooths out the binge watching of it all. And because the people who watch Netflix tend to go from episode to episode more often than not, depending on the kind of series it is, a recap is just annoying. So they also, that's why they also let you skip the title sequence if you want to, because it just depends. If it's a really good title sequence, you'll want to watch it sometimes. But I don't know what the deal was with Babylon Berlin, but that's probably why they had that. I think binge watching, I don't know if it was designed that way again, but I think that there's merits to both, you know. I don't see one as better than the other, watching or waiting a week for a show. There are people who argue that when you release shows all at once, you remove the water cooler element, but Squid Game, I think, blows up that, and other shows blow that up. I think things become a phenomenon no matter what form they take and how you can watch it. And I think that we're at this place in the world where I'm agnostic to form and format and everything. I mean, you know, people watch on their laptop, people watch on their phone. And I remember when I was shooting Godless, I was saying, oh my God, people are going to watch this Western that I shot in widescreen on their, you know, Samsung Galaxy. But now, if they watch it, is really all I care about. And some people like to binge watch, some people don't. I don't know. I don't think that there's any indicator one way or the other. And I think that no matter what, you're designing a show so that people want to keep watching, no matter what, whether it's a week apart or they're all released at the same time. That's really, you're telling a good story, hopefully.
Right. It's just interesting. Like when I first saw this, of course, like I told you, I've written lots of things about Weimar and its films and its popular culture over the years. But when I would tell friends of mine or family, more like family members, oh, you've got to watch this. And they just kind of gave up because if you don't even have an inkling of the history, you don't have to know all the history, and there's so many characters that it's hard to follow at first. I mean, you know, and after 28 episodes, you kind of, you do get in the groove, but especially in that first season, there's so many different things happening. I mean, you've got, you know, the Trotsky faction trying to get the train to Trotsky in Turkey. You've got the, you know, conservatives trying to bring back the Kaiser. You have the gangsters, and you're not even sure there's rival gangsters. I mean, it's just hard to follow who's not Lottie and Roth. I mean, you know, they become your anchor to this world, but they're passing through so many worlds. And that's why I first binge watched it myself with my daughter, who also studied a lot of German history, and we binge watch it. And it also has a lot of, you know, where you jump out of your skin at the end of an episode. But I mean, it took a few days.
No, it's really, really confusing. Yeah. And so, but it's one of those where you're pleasantly confused and you just go with it. You know, I remember watching The Wire and then telling everyone, just watch 4 episodes. By the end of 4 episodes, you'll be fine. Just go with it. And it's never boring. And that's what this was. I was really confused I felt like I needed to know more history than I knew. But ultimately you catch up to it in a way, and the drama is really apparent. You understand, like his brother, the hypnotist, the doctor. I don't understand. I have no idea what that's all about to this day. You know, you can explain it to me some other time, but I'm like, I don't get that, or why his brother is working for the gangster, blah, blah, blah. Get none of that. So, but I think that it's one of those shows where somehow, because these characters are so interesting, you really enjoy following these characters and watching these people, and you trust because there's such a sure hand, behind it all, behind the camera, that you're going to get answers, and you do. And by and large, you really do. And in fact, my biggest problem with the third season is that it wasn't as complex and that it was a little more straightforward. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first two because it was.
We're going to hold that because I'm going to ask you later about which ones you liked and why. But I guess just to finish up with this question, I hear you about scale, and like you said, you're shooting in widescreen. Someone's going to watch it on their phone, and there's part of you that dies a little bit. On the other hand, you want people to watch. But I mean, I would love to see episodes of Babylon Berlin and Queen's Gambit, by the way, in the theater here on campus, because they're so lush and they're so, scale matters. It changes your perception and immersion into the world. So, but I watched both on my television, so there you go.
And you enjoyed it. You loved it. You're very happy. You weren't sitting there watching going, damn it, I wish I could see this on the big screen. You're going, man, I bet this would be great on the big screen. There's a difference.
Right. But as you said, too, when we talked before, you said it's, all you have are images and sound. And I think with Queen's Gambit, the soundtrack was really amazing, as it is here. I think, anyways, we can hold. Let's move on to, we were talking about like character development, and character development is always a matter of plot development and vice versa. From the start, from what I've read, the creators knew they didn't want to make a typical story about the years before 1933 when Hitler took power. They also didn't want to tell a conventional crime story, and I know you're very interested in crime stories, but instead wanted to rethink long arc storytelling, making it more immersive, more novel-like. This is just things I've read from interviews. And they said they had to leave the old ways behind. They weren't going to tell, there's so many crime dramas out there. They wanted to kind of break at least challenge the conventions of the crime drama. What do you think is most innovative about the story's approach to storytelling and crime storytelling? And how did that strike you as someone who's very interested and thinks about this a lot?
It's funny, I appreciated a lot about it. I wasn't sure it was innovative so much as it was just very good. And, it was original in that it just had its own look and its own feel. And it was partly original for me because it was German and it felt very German. It didn't feel American. So I don't know how innovative it was, but I do know that the person, again, going back to Tom Tykwer and Johnny Klink, the composer, he's an electronic music person, that's where he came from, with those clubs. He was a famous guy working in those clubs in East Berlin. So all of the people working on this had this background of sort of very singular, specific kind of art. And so I think you feel that more than anything. It's just really, like I said, and it's a word I'm just going to use over and over. It's just very, very specific. And that's pleasing because it doesn't feel like everything else. And I don't know that that's innovative so much as it is really well done. All those characters you talk about, of course they're really complex because that's just what you're supposed to do, and people, especially in film, they'll say it's more novel-like just if you have somebody who's got more of a character trait than the actor playing them. That's where we've gotten. But you see with series and limited series how you can just really kind of create these amazing characters that throw off story. In a way. And that is what I think. And that's why I think Babylon Berlin becomes so complicated, but in a fun way. Part of the structure of it is a character very much as well.
Yeah. And what struck me is that, and kind of in a tradition of Weimar filmmaking, things are not all explained. Everything isn't tied up. Storylines aren't put to rest. I mean, there's, like you said, with Dr. Schmidt, who is thought to be a quack doctor, hypnotist, but he's, trying to forge a new man for the 20th century. And, at the end, we're supposed to think at one point that perhaps this is our lead character's long lost brother who he abandoned on the battlefields of World War I. But it's unclear that that's true. I mean, he may think that, but that might be transference in the course of analysis, and it's never, you don't know. You just never know. He appears in and out of these storylines, and by the end you think, at least I thought, this isn't his brother. This is no filial.
That was the only one where I wanted to know more. You got to help me here. You got to help me here.
Yeah. I want to return to the Mocha Efti and the final sequence in the show's second episode, where Svetlana performs a Marlene Dietrich kind of inspired gender-bending routine, style, to ashes to dust, flanked by semi-nude dancers in banana skirts made famous by Josephine Baker, who took her career from the US to Paris and then to Berlin in the 20s. Can you tell more about how Uli Hanesh created this and other worlds in the series, including your own, for which he also won an Emmy for his work? Like, just what is the strategy of this kind of creating a world? This, you said there's these locations. When you were doing Queen's Gambit, he was saying, well, here, this could work for this, or that could work for this. But how exactly does he work and build that kind of, because it's such an elaborate set, as you said, that club with all of its hidden recesses, the cold fish locker where our heroine is left to suffer, things like that. How does he work? I mean, how does this come to be?
Well, I think what he does, like all good production designers, is he designs from the story, and the aesthetic and the palette and all of those visual things that are obviously part of any discussion when you're making a film or a series are there, but it all grows out of the story. So when he's designing a club or designing something, he's thinking about what the needs are for the story, not just the physical needs, not just the size of it and how they're going to shoot it, but just how does it work within, as a character, within everything else? What does it say about the people in it? What does it say about the time that we're in, the period? What does it say about just the kind of social mores of that time? All of that. He's thinking about that. He has an amazing team. Mm-hmm. He has an art director, Kai. She's wonderful, and they work very closely together. Sabina, his set designer, is also amazing. They all work very carefully because they also do a ton of research. Mm-hmm. They do there's a ton of images with me. I gave them one image, which I thought represented the palette for Queen's Gambit, this photograph. And then they began to create
what was the photograph?
It wasn't a famous photograph. It was one we took by accident on set one day on a location that we were scouting. Huh. And the cinematographer, we always bring a red camera with us, and we'll take still photos as well as using the actual lenses. And we were shooting in a hotel lobby, and there was an image we caught. It's, but it had everything I wanted. I looked at it and I went, oh my God, this is our show. Yeah. And then Uli began to extrapolate from that, and his team, and they create other images that feel like that image. And then he works very closely with the costume designer, because it has to work well with them as well. And the costume designer, if I know that she's going to be in a room for a scene, and the room might have wallpaper or patterns or a certain color, I want to make sure that the wardrobe goes with it, not in a way that feels, again, like self-conscious, but that feels right and interesting and, pleasing. That's what you're always looking for. What is the most pleasing angle that also tells the story? At least I am. And so that's how he works, constantly back and forth, trying to find the right place. Then you have to go to a very utilitarian mindset. How can we shoot here? Can we shoot here? What can we do here? This may only fit half the bill. Inside is great, outside isn't. What is the formula for shooting inside but not outside? All these things are factored in, and at the same time, sourced back to the story and sourced back to these aesthetic ideas that you're slowly coming to as you develop, as you look at things. And he may design something that kind of is emblematic for him for the whole show. You never know. But he he works very closely from both a story place and a research place, and he has a very specific visual sense as well.
Yeah, yeah, clear. So as we coming to the question that I held back, but so there's 3 seasons. The first 2 focus on crime, international espionage, prostitution, cabaret. You know, at stake is a still image taken from an illicit, a porn film that's could be used to blackmail a political figure, and so on. The 3rd season focuses on the emergence of sound cinema, surrealism, hypnotism, the occult, ending with the stock market crash. So you said you found the 3rd season to be, it wasn't as complicated for you, that you found it. Maybe you could say a little bit more, I mean, about how that struck you.
I actually felt that it was better made than written. I felt that it was really well made, but the story, I wasn't quite as lost in it. Now, it could be because I was more familiar now with what was going on, and so the bar was set, but it didn't feel as just woven, as well woven as and complex as the first 2 seasons did. It was still massively entertaining and still
Yeah, totally. But I
head above the rest. It just didn't, at the end of it, I didn't feel gobsmacked the way I did at the end of the first 2 seasons.
Right, right. I mean, it seems to me the first 2 seasons were really focused on kind of Berlin as the epicenter for all these international currents. I mean, okay, we've got our 2 leads, you know, the man from Cologne. So he's a provincial guy who doesn't really know Berlin. You know, he's a Catholic coming to this big city for the first time, where Lottie, of course, is a local and she knows all the places to go and becomes his guide. He's, you know, but because there's all these complicated stories about the emergence of the, you know, well, not even the emergence, the ongoing efforts of the conservative right to both use the emergent Nazi movement to their own ends, thinking they can control it, you know, kids and young adult males to participate in these paramilitary activities. And then you've got the whole question of, you know, Soviet Union and its relationship to Germany at this time, and then Soviet politics. I mean, I'm just saying it's an international kind of caper, and set in Berlin with a very Berlin focus, but all these people moving through it. So that even, I think it's in season 2 when Svetlana and Kardakov, of all people, is alive and they're in Paris, where she's kind of upped her act to another way. Whereas the 3rd season to me just struck me, it's focused on the film industry and the making of this film, the demon film, and murders on the set and everything. And what took me back was the way that even the film itself that they're shooting looks like a film from, you know, 1920. It looks like Caligari. It doesn't look like anything like the late 20s, where you'd get more of a documentary feel. Like, it seemed, by moving it away from this international story to this very focused gangland Berlin story, it you know, and of course we know the stock market crash is coming. And from what I understand, the next season 4, it will be in 1930 and 31. So yeah, I thought the first one, it left me, I just like, who are these people? And then seeing them return, a lot of things were answered in 3 in a way like I did not want it to be answered. You know, I didn't want the industrialist to be, you know, revealed as just a poor boy whose mother bullied him, you know, it's stuff like that.
Right, right.
So I know, tell us about your upcoming projects. And I'm interested in, especially for our series, to tell us what you're working on next. I've read some things, but you can tell us. And then I'm hoping you could just give us some of your reflections on how television and storytelling and filmmaking is changing. What is global TV? I mean, how does that function? What do you see happening that you could share with us?
Right now, I'm writing but not directing an adaptation of the Mary Doria Russell novel, The Sparrow, which was written in the 90s. It's a science fiction piece about Jesuits who go off into space to prove the existence of God and, of course, what could go wrong. Johan Rank will direct that. He directed Chernobyl, among other things. And I'm doing that for FX/Hulu. So I'm in the middle of writing that. I'm also doing, Tom Fontana and I have written a series, or in the middle of writing a series called Monsieur Spade, which takes place in France in 1962, just as the Algerian War is ending. Sam Spade, yes, that Sam Spade, the Dashiell Hammett character, has been living there for 10, 15 years quietly, sort of not doing what he used to do. He's living out his kind of middle-aged golden years, very happy. And with the ending of the war in Algeria, which brought a lot of darkness back to France, his own tranquility in this small town in the French countryside is about to end. And Clive Owen will play Sam Spade, and I am going to direct those, and we'll go. I think we'll start prepping next May, say. I am also doing a series that I'm not writing but will direct, based on a series of Danish novels called Department Q, that takes place in Edinburgh in Scotland, and it is my guilty pleasure are British procedurals, and I've wanted to do my version of that. And so I'm going to be doing that. I'm not sure when, probably right after Monsieur Spade, I'm guessing we'll do it. They're great books, and the characters in it are tremendous and wonderful, and I really want to do that. And then I'm adapting with Megan Abbott, the novelist. She and I are adapting Laughter in the Dark, the Nabokov novel, which takes me back to Berlin and Weimar days. And I'm doing it as a film, not a series like the others. It'll be a real old school film noir type story. It's also going to involve movie making in Germany at that time, and we're going to have a film within a film. And I'm kind of using the book as sort of a sandbox to play in.
Oh, nice. So what could you tell us about how even your own work has changed, and where you work and how you work, who you work with, and how your work is circulated?
Well, I mean, I think everybody's work has changed in the last year or two, just as we're all isolating ourselves and working remotely, and some of that is for the better for me, because I like to be alone and isolated anyway. But I think that, the business is becoming very global. Storytelling, once upon a time, it was unheard of that anyone would read subtitles. So things were getting dubbed all the time. And there are still those countries that, their citizens will only watch dubbed material. But as for us in the United States, you see over and over again, Babylon Berlin, Lupin, Squid Game, all these shows that are Money Heist, that are giant hits, worldwide hits. And everybody now, you see every company. Disney has Star, AMC just started AMC Plus, which is where I think we'll do Monsieur Spade. So they're all did this to compete globally, to have global shows, just so that they can be everywhere. Department Q, I'm doing with Netflix in Britain. So you see everybody's kind of doing that, because storytelling is a kind of universal language, and it's nice to see those walls broken down. It's also nice to see documentaries in the last 10, 12 years become huge in a way. Nobody would watch a documentary the same way they wouldn't read subtitles. It was a shame. And now people are binge watching documentaries all the time. And you see the rise of podcasts, which are like documentaries. All of this, to me, reflects just a general level of hunger for good stories.
Yeah, it's interesting, the subtitle question, because I think it took me a little too long when I first started watching Babylon Berlin to know I could get rid of the dubbed version. But I remember when I was living and studying in Berlin many years ago, having arguments, especially with my German friends, because it was always said that, like, well, in France, there's no subtitles. We watch our movies, in the language, the texture of the language, this is all part of the thing. And then my German friends would say, we got a really old population, and they're watching these things on TV, and they can't read the subtitles. They have to be dubbed if they're going to be able to watch it. So again, when you're talking about, because even Babylon Berlin, it's dubbed in many different languages. So that, and I think so that
most shows are still dubbed. I mean, Queen's Gambit was dubbed. So many are still dubbed.
Yeah, with lots of different choices. But I think,
Yeah.
again, this is reaching different kinds of audiences. Um, well, we're almost at the 10-minute mark, but I see that we've got questions in the Q&A. I'd like to invite Emily Zinn back to the screen because she's been following questions and remarks in the chat, which I have not been doing because I've been talking to you.
Good
So,
questions I see here.
Yes, there are some good ones here. Thank you so much for taking these, Scott. So the first one we were hoping you could talk a little more about is the use of music in Babylon Berlin, and what makes the use of music so striking in it, and then how do you think about the use of music in your own work in Queen's Gambit or in other projects?
I think the music, what's so striking about the music in Babylon Berlin is that it's just so good. It's just really good. And I think that, you know, again, like I always say, you only get two senses, sight and sound, when you make a show or a movie, and sound is just as important. And I think that for me, music is a huge part of it because you use it either for you know, to kind of augment or enhance what's happening and make you feel it a little more, or you use it to kind of give a vibe or a flavor, you know. It just depends you use it for humor, you use it for all, I mean, there's a million reasons why music is another tool in your sound arsenal. And again, Tom and Johnny, the guys who did the music for Babylon Berlin, they're both old-time music people, and Johnny is an electronic, you know, kind of comes from that whole electronic music scene, and to apply that sensibility and yet it still feels period is really interesting to me, and I think they pulled that off. I think the music is extraordinary, and that title sequence is so good that I hired Saskia to do my title sequence.
no, as soon as I saw that title sequence, I got sold. I mean, that is so amazing.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, you don't want to skip that title sequence. So in a similar vein, we've got a question from Blaine about what's the most important element in recreating a historical period in a way that really immerses the audience, do you think? And I'm also wondering if you can talk a little bit about pitfalls in making a period piece, since you've worked in so many different periods.
You can have a visual cliche so easily, depending on the period, especially the more familiar periods. You know, you can really overdo it. And the trick is to at once make it real and believable so that it doesn't feel like people are playing dress up. You see that a lot of times in shows. Everybody's clothes are perfectly pressed, and you know, you see a Western and no one's got any dirt on them, and they're all wearing fancy hats, and they all look, and it doesn't look real. And even if you're doing something more urban, or you know, everybody, there's a feeling of it just feels fake. It just feels like you're ticking off all the visual boxes. So the challenge is, what's the least amount of telling detail you can use and the most amount of original detail you can use to convey the period. And it's a gut thing, I guess. You know, I guess it's looking at something and knowing that just feels fake to me. And sometimes with background too, you see people walking around and nobody looks real. It doesn't look like anything, you know. But in Babylon Berlin, those city streets and the chaos and the streetcars and everything feels like it's real. It has a kind of grimy, gritty, lived in, you know, instead of presented feel to it.
Excellent. And on a similar note, the answer there may also be the gut feeling answer, but what appeals to you about the way Babylon Berlin uses noir conventions? And in general, why are you interested in noir?
Well, I like the way it's just the noir conventions are in a different place than I'm used to. You know, they're using them politically, which I thought was interesting, to tell a political story instead of a who murdered, you know, so-and-so story. It's very interesting that it's also it's very emotional. It's not an exercise in style. You know, these are real people you care about. And I think noir can be really overdone and can be kind of, you can embrace it, the conventions of it too much. but I think that it's a feeling again, more than anything. I think it just what feels like a kind of noir-y story. And it's both the visuals and the sort of psychological aspects of it. And they balance that really, really well, I think. I mean, it's tremendously made stuff.
I have a question from Lucas Cunningham, who wonders about whether Babylon Berlin influenced how you structured the Queen's Gambit, and if you can talk in general about how you approach story structure.
No, I've been using wonky structure going back to Dead Again, 100 years ago. So I like strange structures. Also, some of that is by necessity. I remember in various things I've done over the years, Queen, Out of Sight was a structured kind of strange because I needed to do certain things to tell the story. Queen's Gambit, I structured it that way because the whole opening chapter was about a little girl, and I didn't want you to come start watching the show and think, oh, this whole show is going to be about a little girl. I wanted to show you immediately that it's not your dad's chess show. So that was sort of the point for that. So structure for me is very important. It is, as I was saying, a character, but it's not a gimmick. It sort of grows out of how I need to tell the story. It's like what works for it's like anything else, like production design or anything else. I'm thinking about, I don't start something by deciding on a structure. I start something by deciding on a story and see how the structure can help me tell the story.
So I have a question from Arsini, who wonders, when working with historical facts, do you refer to historians or do you do some separate research? Do you have consultants who are helping keep track of the facts and the timeline in general? How you work with historical material?
I haven't really done anything historical. I've done things that take place in a historical time, and
Right.
Sometimes there are real people mentioned. For me, it's fiction. And so I do have a researcher who I work very closely with over the years, who kind of, what I'm on the make for is more story details stuff, not the kind of book reporty kind of stuff about a period, but more stuff that might throw off story for me. I had experts in chess for this. I had Garry Kasparov was my sort of world chess expert about Russian chess and the Russian chess scene and Russian chess players and their mindset. And he went through the script with me and offered amazing amounts of ideas in terms of how people are thinking and what they might say. I had Bruce Pandolfini, one of the great chess teachers in the world, also advising me, as well as the actors, and teaching them how to play chess. And they went over the games. So I will have technical people sometimes, depending on what's happening. If I'm the Western, I had all sorts of horse folks involved. So it depends, but historically it's a work of fiction. And so I will bend certain things, as long as the spirit of it is right. And I've ruffled feathers, I know, here and there, but I feel like I'm just trying to tell a story. And Queen's Gambit, that's why most of the characters in it that are in it are fake. You notice there is no Bobby Fischer, who was a huge part of this. No Boris Spassky. They were the major chess people, but they're never mentioned. No one ever talks about them or any of that here. So I have made up people, but the people in the past are referenced in books that she's reading, and she's reading real books, real chess books. And when they talk about legendary chess players, that's all absolutely true.
But I would just want to add too, it's the weird thing with Babylon Berlin. I kept thinking these first 3 seasons are all set in 1929 till October, till the crash. And a lot goes on. I mean, even the fact that the 2 main protagonists can withstand all of the beating and physical challenges and in one, and it's funny because a couple of the children characters who start out as children, they were doing season 2, season 3 several years later, and they're grown up, but you don't care because the story holds as an arc of before the crash, even though it's all in 1929.
And Breaking Bad is the same way. That's supposed to be a year or something.
What a year.
What a year.
So I have a question turning specifically toward the sparrow. Rowan Oliphant wants to know about what aspects of that book made you want to bring it to the screen. And a related question, what's the greatest challenge in adapting a book to a script?
The sparrow, I am not a religious person, and I love how I read the book in the 90s and I wanted to adapt it back then. It's another one I've been chasing for forever. I love how it talks about religion in both a very generous way and a very realistic way, and it does it through genre, science fiction. And it also is about the arrogance of mankind in general, but religion in particular in this case. But it is really fascinating that these people go out we've made first contact and they want to get there first, and the Vatican, ironically, is the only one who can afford to put it together by selling a few paintings. So they go and they, ostensibly to prove the existence that these are God's creatures. And they're just sort of duped by their own faith in a way that isn't cruel, but is interesting. And that's what I loved about it. It walks this line, and it was characters I'd never seen before. It was a way into a story I'd never seen before. And the book is certainly imperfect, but it's full of so many great ideas. Some of the characters in it were kind of maddening to me, but the idea of the characters I thought were terrific. And I'm having a ball with it. What was the other question? Was that
the broader question was, what's the biggest challenge when adapting a script from a book?
Well, if you love the book, it's very hard to decide what to get rid of, and you just have to make it your own. You have to figure out, what is this about for you? You're not trying to directly translate the book, and the book is going to disappoint everybody as a movie, no matter what you do. So you want to make it work as a movie more than anything. And even if it's different here and there, if it really works, there's nothing worse than it not working and it's so different from the book. So the trickiest thing is figuring out, you really have to ask yourself why you're adapting something and how do you make it your story. So it becomes more like a rewrite of something that's already written that you wrote. You'd look at it that way. You look at, these are all my words now, and I'm going to rewrite it into a more efficient kind of story, or I'm going to expand it, or I'm going to do what, depending on the job. But that's it. You have to make it yours.
Excellent. Okay, a last question from my end. Which is, since this is part of a global TV series, I wonder if there's something you want to recommend to our audience as their next series to binge watch.
The French show, The Bureau, is a masterpiece. Even if you don't like espionage shows, it's terrific. It's really very good. There are, I think, 5 or 6 seasons of it. I'm not sure, but it is really, really good. Also, if you love soap operas, I'd watch The Restaurant, which is a Swedish show that's terrific. Also, there are 4 seasons of that. The Bureau is on Amazon, and I think The Restaurant is on Sundance, but they're both terrific. The Bureau is like a perfect show, though. It is high level quality, really well done. The Restaurant, which is also really well done, but it is more of, it's Downton Abbey in a restaurant over 40 years, but very good, very, very good, and well acted.
Good to me.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, thank you, Emily. Thank you, Scott. Thanks for taking the time out to talk to us and be part of our series. And
my pleasure.
Yeah, really appreciate it. We'd love to have you back when your next projects, and hopefully welcome you back to campus sometime.
Someday.
Someday, it'll happen. Anyways, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.